All right. Chapter 4, Lesson 5. We're going to write equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. Now, we've already done parallel lines. I'm going to go through this part on the notes fairly quickly, just to remind you. Key concept about parallel lines is this. If two non-vertical parallel lines have the same slope, in other words, they can't be straight up and down, but if they have the same slope, then they are parallel. Okay? In other words, if you have two equations with the same slope, then you know the lines are parallel. Okay? And also, if two non-vertical lines are parallel, then they have the same slope. Kind of sounds like the same, but we kind of change the order here. So in other words, if you are told these two lines here on this graph, if you're told they are parallel, and you know the slope of one, then you also know the slope of the other because you're told they're parallel, so you know they would have the same slope. Okay? All right, and then our next key concept, we're going to do an investigation first. We have two lines. We have a red line and we have a blue line that passes through each of these points. Okay? So let's find the slope of each of these two lines. So what is the slope of the red line? So the first thing I want to do is this. I want to find the slope of the red line. So I'm going to do 2 minus negative 2, which is my y, minus y, and then negative 3 minus 1, and 2 minus negative 2 is 4, because that ends up being 2 plus 2, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4, and so 4 divided by negative 4 is negative 1. And that makes sense. It's going downhill, so it should be negative. So it's a negative 1. Okay? Now, there's the slope, negative 1. What's the slope of my blue line? So the blue line, let's do the same thing. It's going to be 2 minus a negative 2. Oops, let me change colors here. So 2 minus a negative 2 for my y's, all over 3 minus a negative 1. Okay, so these both become positive. And 2 plus 2 is 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. And 4 divided by 4 equals 1. So let's see. Yep, the slope of this line is blue. And what do we notice? We notice that the slope of this one is negative 1. The slope of this one is positive 1. And interestingly enough, they look like they would be perpendicular. In other words, that they would intersect at a 90 degrees. We don't know for sure, but we think they would intersect at a 90-degree angle. And notice their slopes. One is negative 1, one is positive 1. Now you might be thinking that if you have a positive 4 slope, the perpendicular line might be negative 4. But let's just look and see what happens. So investigating perpendicular lines for a key concept, perpendicular lines. If two non-vertical lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals, what's that? Well, we're going to learn about that in just a second. If they have slopes that are negative reciprocals, then the lines are perpendicular. In other words, if you have two equations with slopes that you discover are negative reciprocals, you know the lines then are perpendicular. Also, if two non-vertical lines are perpendicular, then their slopes are negative reciprocals. Again, sounds the same as this first one, but it's changed around a little bit. So in other words, if you are told two lines are perpendicular and you know the slope of one, you can find the slope of the other by finding the negative reciprocal. Okay? Also, so if you're told the line of one slope, the slope of one line, and then you're told to write an equation that's perpendicular, you would know how to change the slope. So here's what negative reciprocals are. New concept right here. Okay? Negative reciprocals are simply two numbers who multiply together to get a negative 1. Now reciprocals are just the opposites, like 1/4 and 4 over 1. Those multiply together to get a positive 1. We now want to get a negative 1. So notice 3/4, it's flipped and it's negative. So this one's positive, this one's negative, They multiply together to get negative 1. So 2 and negative 1/2. Negative 5 and positive 1/5. 11/12 and negative 12/11. Notice this one the negative is here, and this one the negative is here. It doesn't matter. The negative can be numerator, denominator, or out front. So these are some examples I want you to write down. And then if the slope is negative 1/4 for a negative reciprocal, it would be positive 4/1. Since this one is negative, this one has to be positive. Again, think about it in terms of having to multiply them together to get a negative 1. All right, so those are our key concepts. Let's do some practice. So it says write an equation of the line that passes through negative 3, negative 5, and is parallel to the line y equals 3x minus 1. And then think about what form is this equation in. Okay, this equation is in slope-intercept, so we know the slope immediately. We know the slope is the number right in front of x because we're in slope-intercept. Okay, so identify the slope, and the slope is 3. So the parallel line through negative 3, negative 5 will also have a slope of 3 because we want parallel lines, so same slope. Okay, so now we know the slope of our parallel line through this point. So write your slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. We're going to solve for b. So we're going to use the point that they gave us of negative 3, negative 5 that it passes through. We're going to substitute our y in for the y, our slope in for the m, and our x coordinate for the x. And we're going to solve for b. Okay, so we get b equals 4. For those of you that need to see it, 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Add 9 to both sides, and you get b equals positive 4. Okay, you add 9 here, add 9 here. Okay, that leaves you with b, and 9 minus 5 is 4. So there's our b. So now we have our slope and our b, and so let's write our equation using y equals mx plus b. So there's our m, and there's our b. Okay, so we're back to slope-intercept, and that's okay. That's what we want to use on this. All right, example 2. Now we're going to go perpendicular. So we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do a perpendicular line. So the first step, we want it to be perpendicular to this line here, y equals negative 1/4 x minus 1. Again, we're in slope-intercept, so we know our slope, and first thing is identify our slope. So the slope of this line is negative 1/4. So to have a perpendicular line, we need the negative reciprocal. So flip it 4/1 and make it an opposite sign. So 4/1 and positive. So our perpendicular line will have a slope of positive 4. A parallel line would have a slope of negative 1/4. Perpendicular, positive 4. So here's our point. Here's our slope. You could use point slope, but we're going to solve for b with our slope-intercept. So again, we're going to substitute in our y coordinate, our slope, and our x coordinate, and we're going to solve. So negative 8 equals 4 times 2 is 8. Okay, we're going to subtract 8 from both sides, and we're going to get b is equal to negative 16. So now we have our slope and our b, so we can write our equation. Our slope is 4, our y-intercept is negative 16. Okay. Example 3, last example of the video. Determine which lines, if any, are parallel or perpendicular. So all we're going to be doing is comparing slope. So let's look at line A. Line A is y equals 5x minus 3. It's in slope-intercept. Our slope is 5. You guys agree with that? I hope you do. All right, let's look at line B. This is standard form. It's not going to help me know the slope, so I need to solve this equation into slope-intercept. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides, and I'm going to be left with 5y equals negative x plus 2. My x is negative, my 2 is positive. Negative x, positive 2. Divide everything by 5, leaving me with y equals negative, this is an understood 1, so negative 1/5 x plus 2/5. Okay, so now my slope of line B is right there, negative 1/5. So we know it's not parallel because it doesn't have the same slope, but it is perpendicular because positive 5 and negative 1/5 are negative reciprocals. Let's look at line C. Oh, we have standard form again. So I'm going to erase all this. Okay. And we're going to solve it into slope-intercept. So I'm going to add 2x to both sides. Okay. And I'm left with negative 10y equals, well, all I have left here is 2x. Divide both sides by negative 10. Okay, so y equals 2 over negative 10 is a negative 1/5. That's a negative 1/5, sorry. Let's do it separate. Negative 1/5 x. So my slope for line C is negative 1/5. So which ones are parallel and which ones are perpendicular? Since it says find the slope of the lines, line A, the equations and slope-intercept, we already know that. The slope is 5. Here are the other two slopes. So B and C, since the slopes are the same, B and C are parallel, and B and C are both perpendicular to line A. Let's see if that's what it says. We've done that. We've done the slope-intercept. B and C have slopes of negative 1/5, so they are parallel. Line A has a slope of 5, the negative reciprocal of negative 1/5, so it is perpendicular to lines B and C. All right, stop the video and do the guided practice.